Hey guys, tonight we sail through salt, superstition, and the slightly absurd fears of ancient Greek sailors all to uncover why whistling was practically an offense against the gods. You're perched on the worn deck of a Greek triumph, the kind with 30 oars per side and not a single seat with padding. The sea sways below like a restless animal, all shimmering blue muscle and mood swings. Seagulls shriek overhead, but your crew is oddly quiet. Nobody hums. Nobody sings. And absolutely nobody whistles. You lift your lips out of habit, maybe to pass the time, but the grizzled helmsman gives you a look like you just spit on Athena's sandals. Don't even think about it, he growls. Apparently, out here, a whistle isn't just a sound. It's an invitation, a stupid, mortal invitation for the sea gods to come and ruin your day. Storms, wrecks, drownings, monsters. All courtesy of a poorly timed pucker. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and your local time in the comments. Let's see how global this sleepy fleet really is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You settle in near the forward mast, surrounded by wooden crates filled with dried figs, olive oil, and something that smells suspiciously like goat. The breeze brushes your cheek salty and cool, and the ship creaks under your weight. A sailor to your left clutches a charm carved from olive wood and mutters something under his breath. You catch the word Poseidon. You ask what he's worried about. He doesn't look at you. Storm's listening. And so begins your night aboard a vessel older than your great everyone. You're about to learn that for ancient Greek sailors, the sea wasn't just wet, it was alive. It had moods, opinions, and, most dangerously, ears. Back then, the world was drenched in divinity. There wasn't a tide, sneeze, or creaky door that didn't have a god behind it. And nowhere was this more intense than at sea. Land might have had its gods, sure, but the ocean had Poseidon. Trident in hand, beard full of fury, sea foam breath, and zero patience for your human nonsense. They called him the Earth Shaker for a reason. Earthquakes, whirlpools, rogue waves, classic Poseidon tantrums. And let's be honest, the man did not respond well to sass, especially not from mortals who thought they could direct the wind with a puckered set of lips. So whistly. That's you saying, hey, divine ruler of the sea, I think I can summon breezes better than you can. Which, as hubris goes, is about a 9.7 on the bad idea scale. You might as well insult his beard while you're at it. Historians still argue whether the Greeks genuinely believed the sea gods heard specific sounds or just that certain noises disrupted ritual harmony. Either way, sailors took no chances. No whistling. No singing anything. Too cheerful. Some even avoided laughter when the sea was calm, lest it wake the waves. Imagine that, laughter bad weather. As you settle into the ship's rhythm, you notice something strange. There's no shouting, no yelling of orders. Everything's in gesture. A sharp point. A nod. A quiet grunt. The sailors communicate like a pod of introverted dolphins. You sneeze once softly and two men glance up from their net repair. Apparently, sneezing's not forbidden, but it's not great, either. You hear muttering later among the crew. Something about how the last time someone sneezed on a westward run, they lost a mast to lightning. Coincidence? Sure. But do you want to test Poseidon's sense of humor? Thought not. The ancient Greeks lived with gods in their shadows. Every task, lighting a fire, casting a net, even trimming your toenails, could potentially offend someone divine. And when it came to the sea, the stakes were higher. You're floating on an unpredictable liquid highway with no brakes, no engine, and a top speed of hope the wind cooperates. So, the rule was simple: show respect. Keep quiet. Don't whistle unless you want to meet Charybdis the hard way. And here's a quirky little fact: in some older fragments of maritime poetry, there are references to the whistlers not people, but spirits of wind that came unbidden and mispaved. One poet wrote of a whistler wind that drove a ship off course and laughed while it did. The idea was that to whistle might summon those winds, the chaotic ones, the rule breakers. You glance up now at the sailor square, slightly patched thing of wool and linen. It flutters, then stills. A brief moment of calm. One sailor tightens his grip on the tiller. Another knocks twice on wood. You open your mouth to ask a question, but think better of it. Not just because of superstition, but because everyone looks tense, like they're holding their breath. The air gets thick. Not with fog, but with expectation. Like the sea might answer. Something unspoken. A rogue splash against the hull makes someone gasp. Probably a dolphin. Someone mutters. Sure. Probably. The boat keeps creaking forward, oars slicing rhythmically into the night. The water glows faintly from algae, stirred up in its wake. You imagine what it must have been like for a sailor back then. No GS, no radio, just stars and fear. And when things went wrong, when a sudden storm hit or the ship turned against the wind, your crewmates didn't ask, "Did we forget the weather forecast?" They asked, "Who whistled?" And here's your reality check. By the way, if you had been a sailor back then, you probably wouldn't survive the week. Sunstroke. Spoiled barley. A toe stub turning septic. Or just getting pitched overboard because you cleared your throat too loud. Mortality rates on these ships were not great. But hey, at least the figs were fresh. You lie back on a coiled rope and watch the stars blur ever so slightly. The ship moves forward, silent and creaking, as if afraid to draw attention to itself. The sea listens, and you well. You stay quiet. The wind tonight shifts just slightly, brushing your cheek like a whisper from a forgotten friend. But no one speaks of Aeolus by name, and not unless you really want to tempt fate. You remember the tales. Aeolus, the god king of winds, keeper of air in a leather sack gifted by Zeus himself. He doesn't blow the wind, he owns it, parcels it, and loans it out like a cranky librarian with overdue scrolls. Out here on the open sea, you begin to understand why Greek sailors didn't whistle. The air itself is sacred. It's not just atmosphere, it's divine property. You're moving through a space ruled by capricious forces, not weather systems. To whistle is to mimic the god's craft. It's not cute. It's not charming. It's borderline identity theft. You glance up at the rigging, just as it trembles in a breath of air that arrives uninvited. The helmsman's aim guy who warned you earlier flicks his fingers, in emotion. You've now seen a dozen times. It's somewhere between a blessing and a warning. A kind of sacred semaphore. You ask what it means. He shrugs. It tells Aeolus we're not mocking him. You're pretty sure it looks like jazz hands, but you don't laugh. Historians still debate how widespread belief in Aeolus actually was. Was he a real cult figure, or just poetic shorthand? Some think he started as a literal weather priest on a wind-prone island, and slowly bloomed into a deity through centuries of oral exaggeration. Either way, the fear stuck. You get the sense that these sailors may not know why whistling is bad, only that it is. The logic of superstition is rarely logical, but it's often loud enough to silence generations. One sailor barefoot, tattooed with a dolphin on his arm, leans against the railing. When you whistle, he says slowly, you're calling something. Might not know what. Might not like what shows up. You notice he's holding a bundle of feathers in his other hand. Don't ask. Later that night, you're put on wind watch. It's a meaningless duty, meant for newcomers and daydreamers. You're supposed to stare at the sky and spot subtle changes in the sails or air pressure. Good luck with that. The wind doesn't announce itself. It arrives like a cat, silent, smug, and deeply unwilling to follow instructions. It's during this quiet shift that the ship slows again. The oars pause. You feel the boat go, still eerily, still. A sailor spits over the side and mutters, "Someone whistled." You freeze. You didn't, obviously. But someone must. Or maybe not. Doesn't matter. The belief spreads faster than explanation. Heads turn. Eyes narrow. One man touches his chest 3 times and whispers a name you don't catch. Another starts humming a tuneless chant under his breath. A ritual of sorts. A spiritual Wi-Fi reset. This is what fear looks like. Coordinated, inherited, irrational. You're told to sprinkle salt over the stern. You ask. The cook replies, because that's where the wind follows. That explains nothing. But it feels right. The wind eventually returns slowly, as if watching you with one squinty eye. It pushes against the sail with hesitant fingers. The helmsman sighs in relief. He knocks on wood again. It's a reminder that every breeze is a blessing, and every breath of air is someone's domain. Ancient Greek sailors were, above all else, practical fatalists. They accepted the sea's cruelty. They didn't fight it, they tried to appease it. Offerings to the gods, coins tossed overboard, a lock of hair sacrificed before departure. And silence, always silence when the wind felt near. The fear wasn't just religious. It was deeply psychological. You learn that after a storm, sailors often sat in stunned silence for hours. Not because they were exhausted, though they were, but because they feared talking might draw attention. Like children pretending the monster under the bed can't hear if you whisper. And so, they treated wind with reverence. No sudden noises, no boastful shouts, and absolutely no puckered melodies floating off the bow. Which brings you to one of the strangest tidbits of the night. There's some speculation, yes, this is real, that Greek sailors may have actually believed the wind could be trapped in containers. Some archaeologists think certain jars found on Mediterranean shipwrecks might have been symbolic wind vessels, not just cargo, but divine insurance policies. One such jar had a tiny hole poked in it, like a whistle. A reverse whistle, if you will. Historians still argue whether this interpretation holds any water or wind, for that matter. Some say it's a stretch. Others say it explains why certain amphorae were deliberately cracked before being tossed into the sea, releasing the wind back to Aeolus, lest the ship be cursed for hoarding it. You smile at the thought. A cargo hold full of antique wind traps. Somewhere, Aeolus is rolling his divine eyes. Still, that belief half whisper, half ritual sinks deep into your bones. You find yourself breathing more softly, watching the movement of the sails like they might turn into mouths, listening to the air as if it's listening back. You start to notice things. A shift in tone when the wind changes direction. The sudden silence before a gust. The way older sailors close their eyes and hold their breath, just for a second, when a breeze cuts the stillness like a blade. It's not science. It's not logic. But it's something. A pattern of survival stitched together from centuries of fear, observation, and the occasional shriek of a bird flying the wrong way. Later, while coiling rope, you almost hum a tune. Just a soft little rhythm to yourself. The deckhand beside you stiffens. "Dunt," he says. Just that. No explanation. Just dunt. You nod. You get it now. The wind isn't just wind. It's power. It's mood. It's divine permission to move. And in a world where the sea can turn your ship into splinters in under a minute, you don't test the forces that might be watching. And so, you stay quiet. And the wind thankfully keeps blowing. The triumph glides forward now, rhythmically slicing through the inky blue. You're starting to get the hang of life aboard at least, the not whistling part. But something else becomes clear the longer you're stuck on this floating toothpick. Everything on board relies on rhythm. Not just survival. Coordination. Below deck, the rowers 36 bronze-tanned men with arms like braided rope move as one. They aren't just strong. They're synchronized. Every oar must enter and leave the water at exactly the same time, or the ship starts jerking like a toddler on roller skates. A man at the front keeps the beat. Not a drummo. That's more of a Roman thing. Here it's a flute, sometimes a voice, sometimes just the slap of a stick against wood. The moment it falters, the oars falter. The moment someone whistles a stray note off rhythm. Chaos. You watch as one unfortunate deckhand absent-mindedly lets out a high-pitched whistle, barely a chirp. Not even a song. The rowing skips. Oars knock together. One man curses. Another nearly falls over. The rhythm is broken, like a heartbeat skipping a beat. The helmsman yells. Do you want to swim home, you crow-brained idiot? Whistling doesn't just offend the gods. It offends the boat. The very mechanism of movement depends on a kind of sacred musical order. And you, with your careless lips, just played the wrong note in Poseidon's symphony. You're starting to see how deeply this superstition is built into maritime culture. It's not just fear. It's function. A rogue sound could mean disaster. Historians still debate whether the anti-whistling taboo began as a religious belief or a practical safety rule that masqueraded as religious belief, like the ancient version of "don't stand up during takeoff." It's not just about comfort. It's about keeping the fragile balance of very breakable things in motion. And yet, the more you think about it, the more it makes sense that Greek sailors would wrap practicality in ritual. They lived in a world where every action had a cosmic consequence. You tie your sandal wrong. That's why the goat got sick. You spill wine. Boomstorm, season starts early. You whistle off beat. Clearly, that's why the waves are trying to kill you. Later in the afternoon, you notice something odd. No one ever sings alone. Singing together? That's fine. Encouraged, even. The rowing songs are surprisingly catchy. But solo melodies. Taboo. It's like the sailors have some primal fear of individual noise. And again, it's not about the sound, it's about the shape of the sound. Whistles, trills, high notes that float without grounding, they cut through the harmony like a blade. There's a belief among some sailors that whistling is the wind's language. To mimic it is to lie in the tongue of a god. Or worse, to summon something that can speak back. You test this theory quietly by watching a seagull. It whistles. Nothing happens. A sailor glares at it like it just insulted his mother. Okay, so even birds aren't immune to judgment. Quirky fact time. In some coastal villages, whistling was banned not just on boats, but in the harbours. Dock workers were fined. Children were scolded. There were even fishermen who carried tiny wooden carvings shaped like closed mouths, just in case someone got ideas. One elderly crew member named Dimas tells you the story of a boy who whistled at sea and vanished overboard the next night. No splash. No cry. Just gone, he says. Like the sea plucked him for insolence. You ask if he believes it. He squints at you. You think it matters what I believe? The sea doesn't care about beliefs. It only cares about rules. That night, the moon hangs low and lazy over the water. The rowers have finally rested, hammocks tied between beams like a half-drunk spider web. You lie beneath them, gazing through gaps in the hull at the stars. You try to imagine the life of a full-time oarsman. No engine. No steering wheel. Just arms, rhythm, and the constant fear that some fool's whistle will throw off your beat and snap your shoulder. It's in this meditative state that you remember another odd phrase Dimas muttered earlier. Whistle once and the sea will ignore you. Whistle twice and the sea starts to listen. But 3 whistles you asked what happened at 3. He didn't answer. Just spat. You make a mental note never to test that limit. There's a kind of beauty in how fragile everything is. The wood beneath you is thin and groaning. The ropes are worn. The sea is vast and casually homicidal. But despite all this, the boat moves. It works barely, but it works. And that balance depends on silence, cooperation, and a deep respect for rhythm. So no, you don't whistle. You barely breathe with any enthusiasm. And when the helmsman starts the next rowing cycle with a clap and a hum, you feel your heart align with the pulse of the crew. 30 oars dip. Together, rise together, drip together. Like one body. Like a machine built from hope, muscle, and the fear of making the wrong sound. The wind picks up again, gentle, forgiving. And this time, it stays. You wake at dawn to the sound of nothing. No gulls. No waves slapping wood. Just a low, eerie stillness, as if the ocean's gone shy. Around you sailors rise like creaky ghosts, rubbing eyes, checking knots, sniffing the air. One of them mutters, too quiet. You've heard that before in movies. Usually just before something explodes. But here, in the real, sticky world of ancient Greek seafaring, too quiet doesn't signal a dramatic ambush. It signals omens. You stretch, but freeze mid-yawn. Because even yawning is considered a kind of sign. You overheard someone say last night that if the first person to yawn aboard yawns facing east, it's a good omen. If west, time to start praying. You yawned south. The sailor sees your hesitation and throws a grape at you. Don't worry, he says. It's only the captain's dreams that matter. Oh, good. No pressure. The Greeks were obsessive omen readers. You already know that whistling is a no-no, but this ship is basically a floating astrology chart. The direction of bird flight. Omen. A sneeze mid-sentence. Omen. The way a rope curls after being dropped. That's an omen too. Every little thing is a divine hint of threat, and the thing is they believed it. This wasn't quaint mythology to them. It was a survival toolkit. When you're at the mercy of the sea, you grab onto any system that gives the illusion of order, even if it involves reading bird poop like tea leaves. You learn quickly that sailors even avoided whistling on land the day before departure. They thought it could attract bad air. What's bad air? You ask. They shrug. The kind that follows you onto the boat. Helpful. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were rooted in shared religion or a sort of maritime group psychology passed down through generations as a way to manage fear and enforce behavior. In short, superstition might have been less about theology and more about control. But back to the ship. As the sun rises, so do the omens. The gull flies eastward. The captain spills a cup of watered winebed. The first fish caught that morning is a small tuna neutral. The second fish is a squid that inks the deck of bad. One of the younger sailors scrubs the ink stain while whispering a prayer to Proteus, a shape-shifting sea god who supposedly appears in squids, seals, and, oddly, runaway dogs. You glance around. There is, in fact, a stray dog on board. You're beginning to understand how difficult it is to keep your mind grounded at sea. Without firm land beneath your feet, reality becomes slippery. You reach for patterns. You look for signs. And when you whistle and the wind dies 5 minutes later, you start to believe the signs are looking back. Mid-morning, an old sailor named Thalos tells you a story about a crew that whistled at dolphins once. Just for fun. They laughed, copied the sounds, made jokes about teaching dolphins to row. The next day, their mast cracked in half. Lightning, out of nowhere. Never whistle at something smarter than you, Thalos says. Then he adds, which, to be honest, is most animals. You begin to understand that whistling wasn't just about the gods or the sea, it was a signal of carelessness. A sign you weren't taking the voyage seriously. And on a vessel where every moment could turn deadly, that made you a liability. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some texts mention certain approved sounds to ward off bad luck, like tongue clicks or rhythmic tapping on a hollow gourd. There were ritual noises allowed, but not random ones. Whistling was random, ungrounded, dangerous. One sailor even compares it to talking out of turn during a funeral. That's the tone we're working with. Later in the afternoon, a sudden gust spins the sail sideways. A rope comes loose. A hammock spreads momentarily and everyone scans the deck. Who did it? Someone yells. Eyes settle on a young boy who's already crying. No one heard a whistle, but someone felt one. That's enough. They don't punish him, just make him wear a red cord around his wrist for the rest of the voyage. Protection, they say. You notice a few others already wear the same cord. You hadn't before. Now you do. Historians still debate how many of these customs were standardized versus local. One island might fear whistling at dawn. Another might fear it only after dark. But the core idea remains. Don't mess with unseen forces. You try asking the cook if he believes in all this. He shrugs, flipping a grilled fish. Belief's got nothing to do with it, he says. You see enough strange things out here. You stop needing reasons. He offers you a piece of fish. It's salty and delicious. You ask what kind it is. Not sure, he says. But it came up clean. No ink. That's good. You nod, chewing. You're still not whistling. By sunset, the sky turns a kind of burnished gold that seems unreal. The ship cuts across calm waters like a blade across silk. And you think for a brief, foolish moment about trying it. Just a small whistle. See what happens. But then a dolphin surfaces, looks at you with weirdly knowing eyes, and dives again. You decide maybe later. Maybe never. The stars come out, and once again, the wind holds steady. And the sea alive, listening, judging lets you pass. The sea tonight is unnervingly calm. A slick, glassy plain stretches in all directions, like someone spilled mercury across the horizon. No waves, no wind, just the faint sound of water slapping lazily against the hull. It feels less like sailing and more like waiting. And the crew hates waiting. This is when the whispers start. You're perched near the stern, chewing on stale barley bread, when a sailor sits beside you without invitation. He has a long scar across his chin and smells faintly of smoked eel. You feel it. He asks. You nod, because something feels off. He leans closer. The sea's listening. It's not a metaphor. Not for him. For ancient Greek sailors, the ocean was more than water and salt. It was a thinking, breathing entity, a vast spirit that observed your every move. Like a bored god with nowhere to be and too much time to judge. You glance overboard. The reflection of the ship warps in the still water, twisted by the slow, syrupy movement of the current. It feels like the ocean is mimicking you. Like it's waiting for you to do something stupid. Like whistle. Here's a fringe belief you hear about over the next hour, whispered between deckhands like a dirty joke. Some say the sea holds memories. That every sound, every curse, every whistle ever uttered upon its surface still echoes somewhere below. A watery archive of mistakes. They call them ghost wave, sudden, inexplicable swells that seem to come from nowhere. And guess what supposedly triggers them? Here. Whistling. All the wind wrong, one sailor says, and the sea might answer with something else. It's moments like this that you realize just how much mythology fills the gaps where science doesn't reach. These aren't dumb men. They're practical, tough, sea-hardened professionals. But when the sea refuses to behave, they don't pull out a barometer. They pull out a prayer. Historians still argue whether the belief in a listening sea comes from older Minoan traditions or was simply a sailor's attempt to cope with the ocean's unpredictability. After all, you can't control the sea. But maybe you can earn its patience. Or at least avoid insulting it. And that's what whistling is. Not just a noise. Not just an annoyance. It's an insult. Like shouting into a cathedral. Like humming during a funeral. It suggests you think this enormous, deadly, divine place is your playground. That never ends well. You learn that many Greek sailors, before boarding, would perform tiny rituals of apology to the sea, itself. A coin tossed into the harbour. A drop of wine spilled on the dock. One man carved a face into a piece of driftwood and tied it to the mast. This watcher, he called it a witness. A brag. And you notice they never refer to the ocean as it. Always she. Or she, the deep one. Or that old mother with sharp teeth. It's not affection. It's respect laced with fear. By midday, the wind finally stirs again, just a breath. Enough to fill the sails slightly, to bring motion back to the drifting stillness. The crew exhales as one, like someone just unclenched the tension in their spines. But it's short-lived. The lookout suddenly points east. There's a shadow on the water. Not a stormo, too low, too fast. It's a pod of dolphins. Except no one's happy to see them. Normally, dolphins are good luck. But one sailor quietly says, too many. Another replies, wrong direction. They don't elaborate. You don't ask. Superstition is full of exceptions. You're learning that everything is conditional. A gull flying east is good, unless it cries twice. A calm sea is good, unless it happens just after someone sneezed. Dolphins are good unless they arrive after someone dreamed of teeth. Then it's a sign. Oh, what? No one's sure. But a bad one. A rower breaks rank and whispers to the man beside him, heard a whistle last night. The other man stiffens. You sure? The first nods. No one says who it was. No one needs to. Later, you overhear the captain quietly ordering the deck to be sprinkled with seawater to clear the memory, he says. You watch as sailors take turns dipping small bowls, flinging droplets across the wood in tight circles, like priests with salty incense. And this isn't a religious ceremony sanctioned by temples. This is sailor religion. Oceanic etiquette. Rules passed down not from Olympus, but from the 1,000 shipwrecks that came before. One man tells you a tale about an island where no one is allowed to whistle, not on boats, not in homes, not even in the fields. They say a woman once whistled to call her dog, and the wind answered with a wave so tall it erased the shoreline. True. Probably not. But in a world without weather reports or rescue helicopters, stories are your infrastructure. They are the tools of memory and prevention. Here's a quirky little nugget. Sailors believed certain animals could whistle, and those animals were to be watched. Otters, parrots, occasionally seals. One even swore he heard a squid whistle once. You're not sure whether to laugh or nod solemnly. By evening, the ship feels normal again. The wind steadies. The oars return to rhythm. You breathe easier. But when you look at the ocean deep, quiet, away, you don't just see water anymore. You see eyes. Eyes that don't blink. Eyes that remember. And you, tucked into a blanket of ropes and sails, feel yourself becoming part of the pattern. One heartbeat among many. One breath among waves. And if you ever feel a whistle coming to your lips, you know now. You'll hold it in. Night settles in with a cool hush, the kind of silence that prickles your neck more than soothes it. The stars blink awake overhead, unfamiliar constellations scattered across the dome like careless droplets of milk. Below, the sea glows faintly with bioluminescent life-tiny pinpricks of green and blue swirling in your ship's wake. Beautiful. Hypnotic. And absolutely the worst time to talk about ghosts. But here you are, huddled near a lantern with 3 other sailors, their faces flickering in golden light, passing a skin of wine and whispering tales you didn't ask for but can't stop hearing. Don't whistle on night watch, says the youngest, barely more than a boy. That's when they come. Who? You ask. The boy pauses dramatically. Of course he doesn't, says, the drowned. Welcome to the ghost story portion of your voyage. Turns out, ancient Greek sailors weren't just worried about angry gods or fickle winds. They believed the sea held souls. Particularly these ones taken unfairly wreck victims, betrayed crewmates and poor fools who slipped overboard during a storm. And when the night gets still and the air feels too light, that's when the stories come back. That's when they come back. According to the older sailor with the mossy beard, you must never whistle at sea because the drowned might mistake it for a call. And unlike the gods, they answer. And unlike the gods, they don't forgive. Historians still argue whether these tales were linked to Orphic mystery cults or just good old-fashioned trauma. Some say sailors invented ghost legends to explain the inexplicable. A man missing from roll call. A strange knock beneath the hull. The sudden chill of fog that shouldn't exist in summer. But the specifics, those come from the whisper chain. You learn about scions, sure half-bird, half-woman temptresses who sang sailors to their doom. But the guys tonight are more interested in the less popular sea spirits, like the Alulks, described as shadows with no mouths, who roam beneath the water and echo back only the sounds they hear above, warped, watery, wordless. If you whistle, they whistle back. But not quite right. Just enough to make your skin crawl. Or the Ectes, known as the wet ones, who leave footprints on the deck even when no one's aboard. You hear the story of a cargo ship that lost a sailor after a storm, and for the rest of the trip, each morning someone found wet footprints circling the mast. They say the captain tried to whistle one night just once and vanished before dawn. One sailor laughs darkly. Or maybe he just jumped. And that's the point. These aren't fairy tales. These are explanations. The sea is cruel, random, and merciless. But if you can blame a spirit or a curse, you don't have to face how fragile you really are. Out here, your boat is a floating contradiction, solid but vulnerable, full of life, but always one gust away from tragedy. You climb to the stern, needing air. The stars stretch endlessly, and the water below reflects them in shimmering streaks. You imagine how easy it would be for something down there to be watching. Waiting. You almost laugh at yourself. Almost. Then the wind shifts. Not hard. Not sharp. Just sideways. Raw. The sail ripples once. You glance around. Nobody's speaking. Nobody's moving. It's like the ship itself is holding its breath. Then you hear it. A soft, high-pitched note. Not humour. Not bird. Just a faint wee carried by the breeze. You freeze. It might be the rigging. It might be the mast groaning. It might be someone whispers, "Don't answer it." And you don't. Your throat tightens. The urge to whistle back to confirm it's just the wind is almost unbearable. But you know better now. Because if something does answer, you don't want to be the one who called it. Another fringe tidbit comes up the next morning. Sailors believe that if you ever accidentally whistled, you could undo the curse by biting your finger until it bled and flicking the blood into the sea. It distracts the spirits, someone explains. They follow the taste, not the sound. Absolutely charming. Others carry tiny brass charms in the shape of tongues, hung around their necks or sewn into clothing. Symbolic silencers. One man has a bell with no clapper. Rings only in the world below, he says. Whatever that means. You ask if anyone's ever actually seen one of these ghost spirits. The cook replies without looking up, no one who talks about it afterward. You let that sit in your brain like a cold stone in your pocket. By late afternoon, the ship reaches a stretch of sea known for strange echoes. Not from land, it's open water, but sound travels oddly here. A cough on deck can bounce back from nowhere. A rope creak sounds like a sigh. Naturally, the crew avoids any noise now. You watch as a jar of olives slips off a crate and crashes to the floor. Half the deck flinches. One sailor immediately begins muttering a chant under his breath, waving a fishbone in a slow circle. You ask, is that to ward off the drowned? He says, no, it's to tell them we didn't mean to wake them. That night, just before you turn in, you ask an older sailor if he ever believed in any of it. He shrugs. I've never seen a ghost, he says, but I've seen men vanish. And that's close enough. You lie in your hammock, rocking gently. The sea is quiet again. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears. You want to hum, maybe whistle, just to break the stillness. But you don't. Because tonight, you believe just a little. And that's all it takes. You wake with the taste of salt on your tongue and the soft hiss of waves against the hull. The sun has just started clawing its way over the horizon, turning the sky into a smear of peach and bronze. The oars dip in unison. The crew, bleary-eyed and already sweating, moves like one sluggish organism. Someone sneezes. Half the men flinch. Someone else spits over the side and mutters. Not a good start. You're about to ask why, because, well, sneezing happens when a gruff voice beside you cuts in. Sneeze before wind. Gods are watching. Another day, another superstition. And you know exactly where this is going. Whistling, you've learned by now, is more than just a taboo, it's practically a declaration of war. But why? Why does such a small sound carry such enormous weight? You dig deeper today and discover something foundational to Greek culture, especially at sea, the idea of hubris. And whistling, believe it or not, is full of it. Out here, far from temples and agora gossip, the open sea becomes your only arena for cosmic etiquette. Poseidon, Aeolus, Amphitrite, these are not just names in a hymn. They're real presences. Listening. Judging. Occasionally throwing a storm for fun. And your job, as a speck of mortal flesh in a splintery boat, is to stay humble. So, whistling. It's not just a sound, it's an act of arrogance. You're essentially saying, I control the wind. I call it when I please. And if there's one thing the gods of Greek mythology hate more than a liar, it's a presumptuous mortal. Just ask Icarus, or Niobe, or anyone who ever said, surely the gods won't mind if they minded. Historians still argue whether this connection between sound and pride was religious in origin or simply a psychological projection. Perhaps whistling felt like an assertion of control over chaos, and in a world as brutally unpredictable as the Aegean, that illusion of power was dangerous. So, the taboo spread. Some ship crews reportedly refused to even speak the word whistle at sea. They called it the sharp breath or the tongue's mistake. Euphemisms for a crime too risky to name. You learn that some captains, particularly those of wealthier merchant vessels, kept a small chest on board filled with symbolic atonement offerings to Poseidon, Hermes, or even lesser sea nymphs, tiny figurines, etched shells, the gold coin wrapped in linen, all ready to be tossed overboard just in case someone did the unthinkable. And someone always did. New crew, one man says with a smirk. Always got someone who thinks they're charming. Apparently, some whistled to flirt with luck. Others just got bored. A few too few made it back to port to regret it. Later that day, you're repairing a torn sail alongside a barrel-chested sailor named Micah. Is the practical sort. Doesn't seem especially religious. But when you joke lightly, nervously that maybe you'll try a tiny whistle when no one's looking, he drops his needle. No, he says, without looking up, not even for a joke. You press him, gently. What does he think would happen? He finally turns to you and says, I don't think. That's the point. He gestures to the sea. She hears what she wants. That quiets you. Because now you're not just dealing with gods, you're dealing with personality. The sea isn't a thing, it's a presence. A moody, unpredictable, often vengeful presence that doesn't tolerate insolence. That's why even the act of whistling, with its sharp, air-cutting tone, feels like an offense. Like dragging your nail across a temple wall. Quirky tidbit time, some records suggest that Greek coastal towns passed laws discouraging whistling not just at sea, but during windy weather inland. It was seen as calling chaos into an already disturbed room. You wonder how those people would feel about modern sports referees. Later, you watch as a young sailor accidentally drops a net overboard. Nothing major. It's retrieved within minutes, but the mistake is followed by a short, sharp blast of air from someone's lips, an exhale of frustration. It sounds like a whistle. Silence falls. Nobody moves. Then someone says, he didn't mean it. Another, he should say it. The boy stammers. I didn't whistle. The captain who, until now, has stayed aloof approaches. He hands the boy a handful of crushed lavender and some ash from the cooking fire. Sprinkle this on the bow, he says. Say nothing for the next hour. And the boy obeys. You ask a nearby crew member if that's a formal ritual. He shrugs. No. But it's something. And sometimes something is all you've got. By evening, the wind picks up slightly. Not much, but enough to let the crew breathe easier. And you, still a little stiff from sail mending, sit at the stern watching the sky turn indigo. A few men quietly chant a rowing song under their breath, soft, melodic, far from any whistle. You realize, now, that silence isn't just safety here. It's humility. It's survival. It's the space between man and sea, where respect lives. And the sea, thankfully, stays quiet in return. The wind dies again. Not suddenly, but like it's backing away on tiptoe, unsure whether it wants to be here at all. 1 minute your sail flutters gently, the next it droops like a sulking child. The crew goes quiet. Again. You've begun to understand the rhythm of panic. It's not loud. It's silent. A held breath. A sidelong glance. A jaw that clenches just a bit too long. Dead calm. Someone mutters. Another sailor spits. Someone's mouth wandered. The phrase puzzles you, but you don't have to wait long for clarification. A third sailor lean, with sunburned knuckle slares at the younger oarsman. Who whistled. Nobody answers. Of course not. No one ever admits to it. But that doesn't matter. Out here, guilt is collective until someone proves themselves innocent with enough garlic and superstition. And you? You've already seen how fast fear spreads on open water. A dead calm Bonaccia, some called it later in history, isn't just inconvenient. It's existential. No wind means no movement. No movement means drifting. Drifting means burning through supplies, baking in the sun, becoming a floating banquet for passing sharks and existential dread. But worse than that. It means the sea is displeased. And guess what sailors believe causes a displeased sea? Here. Whistling. Historians still debate whether the Greeks had a formal term for windless punishment, but in sailor lore it was known simply as the stillness, not a noun, a condition, a moment suspended between time and consequence. Sometimes it lasted minutes, sometimes days, and if you believed the stories, sometimes the calm didn't end until the sea forgave you. You watch as the crew breaks out their emergency toolkit. No, not ropes or tools or sails. Rituals. They start murmuring old prayer jar finished, handed down like bad family recipes. One man pours wine onto the deck. Another unties and retees the same knot over and over again, whispering the names of gods like their lottery numbers. The captain, stoic until now, paces the deck 3 times in a spiral, then tosses a small copper coin into the water. To appease her, he says, in case someone spoke out of turn. They mean whistling, of course. But they never say it directly, as if naming the crime might call down its punishment. You ask if this has worked before. The cook chuckles, darkly. It worked last time, or maybe the wind just came back. The thing about superstition is that it doesn't need logic. It just needs results. You toss a coin, the wind returns, and nobody asks too many questions. But you do notice something else, kind of quiet policing that happens among the crew. The whispers aren't just about omens, they're about discipline. Whistling becomes a way to mark someone as unreliable, disrespectful, dangerous. It's a scarlet letter in sound form. One sailor tells you of a crew that stranded a man on a small island not because he committed a crime, but because he couldn't stop humming. It got into his bones. The sailor says he didn't mean harm, but the sea didn't care. You don't know if the story's true. Probably not. But out here, stories matter more than truth. They become rules. And so on this windless afternoon, you sit still with everyone else. No one plays dice. No one sings. Even the laughter has dried up. Everyone just waits for the breeze to return like peasants hoping for rain. Here's a quirky detail you pick up. During dead calms, some crews employed wind callers, not official titles, just designated oddballs, the kind of man who always seemed half-drunk on fennel and moonlight. He'd chant, gesture, sometimes climb the mast and shout insults at clouds. It wasn't about results. It was about giving the crew something to believe in. Your ship doesn't have a wind caller. But the youngest deckhand climbs halfway up the rigging anyway and begins softly singing a rowing chant, not a whistle, but close. Everyone glares at him. He stops. You think about whistling. Just once. Just to test it. Just to see. But even in your imagination, you feel the deck lean away from you. The sails stiffen in judgment. The sea holds her breath. Better not. Hours pass. The heat thickens, clinging to skin like syrup. You feel your brain slow down. The captain naps, barely blinking. The oars are tied in place with loose rope, like arms, folded in protest. And then, at the edge of your hearing so faint you wonder if you imagined it, comes a ripple. A whisper. The breeze. Not much. Not enough to move the sail. But just enough to rattle a rope against the mast. Everyone hears it. No one speaks. It's a test. The captain rises, nods once. No commands. No cheer. Just quiet acknowledgement. A moment later, the wind returns properly. The sail billows. The ship lurches forward, hungry to move. And just like that, the stillness ends. Not with a storm. Not with a sound, but with a lesson whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. Don't tempt the sea. The island of Cyprus appears on the horizon like a crumpled green cloak tossed over blue silk. A murmur spreads across the deck relief, anticipation, and a tinge of nervous energy. Port means wine, fresh bread, and solid ground. It also means gossip. And out here, gossip is how superstitions go viral. You dock in a small harbour nestled between white cliffs and sandstone ruins. Air smells of roasted garlic and goat dung. Colourful sails hang limp in the heat, and bronze-bangled merchants hawk spiced olives with the urgency of men chased by time. While the crew unloads amphorae and trades for water and figs, you wander toward a seaside tavern, drawn by the sound of laughing sailors. Inside, the usual scene. Sandaled feet, stained tunics, cups of wine clinking, but the words floating above it all are familiar. He whistled. Someone shouts in broken Greek. Right there on deck. The table erupts in groans and laughter. But not funny laughter. The kind that hides fear behind bravado. You slide into a bench and sip lukewarm wine, eavesdropping with practiced innocence. The sailor telling the story is Phoenician Decai's, cracked lips, salt in his beard. He gestures with wild hands. Just one whistle, a soft one. But it brought bad luck. Wind flipped, sail tore, and our anchor rope snapped. Everyone nods solemnly, even the drunkest. You realize something important. This taboo isn't just Greek. Whistling at sea is hated by the Egyptians, avoided by the Phoenicians, feared by the Anatolians. Even a grizzled Etruscan trader says his uncle drowned a whole crew of chickens just to undo a whistle curse. You don't ask. Historians still argue how and when these superstitions spread across ancient maritime cultures. Was it trait? Shared trauma? Or did the sea itself teach them? When dozens of cultures agree that one sound invites misfortune, maybe they're all reading from the same waterlogged hymn book. A grumpy Cypriot sailor at your table leans over and whispers, "The wind doesn't belong to anyone." But it listens to everyone. Then he tosses a salt packet over his shoulder and drinks. You learn that in this port, whistling is banned not just on ships but on piers. Fishermen wear coral beads and small fish bones around their necks to protect the breath. One barmaid slaps a lute player for whistling during a song and mutters something about her cousin being swept off a ferry near Rhodes. It's everywhere. You chat with an old dockhand who claims to have served on 50 ships. All different gods, he says. But one rule, no whistling. He taps his wrinkled temple. Because the sea has only one voice. Yours should never compete. It's a poetic way of saying shut up, but you respect it. Outside, near the market square, you find a tiny shrine made of driftwood and seashells, adorned with little offering scoins, fish scales, bits of feather. An inscription, in shaky onyx script, reads to the ones beneath the tide. Let us pass. You wonder how many sailors left prayers here. How many whispered apologies for noises they didn't mean to make. Here's a quirky little fact the townkeeper tells you. Between wiping mugs, on certain feast days, towns held silent parades to honor local sea gods. No music. No clapping. Just a procession of barefoot people walking in reverent hush down to the waterline. The gift of quiet. You ask. He shrugs, because words stir waves. There's something oddly beautiful about that. That silence isn't just absence, it's offering. A conscious withholding. In a world where humans filled the air with so much chatter and command, maybe silence was the only thing the sea respected. You return to the ship at dusk, arms full of olives and slightly buzzed from cheap wine. The crew is in better spirits. The wind is up. The hold is restocked. Even the captain hums softly, tunelessly, and notably not a whistle. You sit beside one of the older deckhands and ask if the fear of whistling has ever faded. He shakes his head. It's in the bones now. You feel it before you think it. Then he grins and adds, "Besides, we've all heard the stories." You ask what stories. He tells you about the carrion ghost ship that drifts the southern coast, always with a single man on deck, lips pursed, endlessly whistling with no wind in his sails. Anyone who hears the sound. First to drift too. You raise your eyebrows. He winks. Probably nonsense. But are you gonna test it? You shake your head. Exactly. As night falls over Cyprus, you lie on the deck, the sail above you fluttering like a lazy heartbeat. The stars feel closer here. And beneath you, the sea rolls with slow, deliberate movement, neither friend nor foe. Just listening. You wonder what stories the water carries, what languages it remembers, and whether every whisper and whistle from every ship, past and future, is still echoing down in its endless blue belly. You decide not to add yours to the collection. The next day dawns with golden light and a stiff breeze is a perfection. The Trime pulls away from Cyprus with fresh supplies, cheerful banter and only mild hangovers. The mood is light. But as you know by now, light moods don't always last, especially when the crew starts talking too much. You find yourself beside a muscular sailor with a nose like a broken oar. His name's Corinos, and he's carving tiny spirals into a piece of olive wood. You ask what he's making. A gossip trap, he says. You blink. A what? He doesn't look up. Heaps stories from growing teeth. Welcome to the second wave of fear, not just the act of whistling, but the retelling of it. Turns out, word of a whistle spreads faster than the actual sound. And if you think the gods don't care about gossip, think again. Ancient Greeks believed in logos speech as action. Words shaped reality. So telling a story about a man who whistled and died could, in some minds, recreate the conditions for disaster. Think of it as maritime karma via rumour. And no place spreads rumour faster than the tavern. Remember that night in Cyprus? Every sailor heard a different version of the Phoenicians' story by morning. In one, the whistle summoned a storm. In another, it summoned a sea dragon. In the most creative version, the whistler turned into a bird mid-sentence and flew straight into the sail. Historians still argue whether these stories were exaggerated for drama or sincerely believed, but out here, belief is the air you breathe. There's no library, no map updates, just the stories you carry. And those stories shape behavior. One sailor tells you how, on his last voyage, a man claimed to have dreamed of whistling, not even in waking life. Just dreamed it. The next day, the rope snapped and the main beam cracked like a thunderclap. He never sailed again, the sailor says. Didn't die. Just couldn't face the sea. You hear another tale about a captain who banned singing altogether because he was afraid one of the harmonies might accidentally form a whistle. Extreme. Sure. But not unheard of. Here's a quirky tidbit. On some ships, sailors developed a kind of informal censorship language to talk about forbidden things. They'd refer to a whistle as the snake's kiss or the crooked note. Even sea winds got nicknames: Breath, the mother's mood, or simply she. This wasn't poetry. It was protective. Misdirection. Don't name the thing you fear, and maybe it won't notice you. You realize something clever. These euphemisms actually protected people from repeating risky stories. A sailor might say he tempted the breeze instead of he whistled during the night watch, which of course sounds less threatening, but it still carries the warning. And that's the secret function of gossip among sailors, behavior enforcement disguised as story time. Whistle, and the gods might strike you down, but just as likely, your crewmates will make sure you're the cautionary tale for the next decade. The ship sails smoothly that day. Sun glinting on the water, sails puffed like chestnut cakes, and dolphins playing in the wake. Everyone's calm. And then, predictably, someone starts talking. It's a young row-rager, sweaty, too loud. He's telling a new recruit a funny story about a man who whistled near Delos and got cursed to speak backward for the rest of his life. Everyone goes quiet. Even the dolphins seem to dive deeper. The helmsman's hand tightens on the tiller. And just like that, the wind stutters. Not dies. Not reverses. Just hesitates. Enough to make the sail slap loosely. Enough to make everyone stop chewing, stop speaking, stop breathing. The rower gulps and says, "It's just a story." But it's too late. The damage isn't physical. It's atmospheric. A shift in mood. The kind of social tension that makes everyone suddenly remember they forgot to touch their charm, forgot to tap wood, forgot to avoid that one cursed phrase. The captain walks over, silent, and holds out a fish scally thin, translucent, like sea glass. Hold it in your mouth, he tells the boy, until the wind returns. You think it's absurd, but the boy obeys. 2 minutes later, the breeze picks back up. Coincidence? Maybe. But the crew lets out a collective exhale. Later that night, the boy admits the scale tasted like old boots. You all laugh. Gently. But no one retells the story again. You begin to understand that the myth of the whistle lives not just in fear of gods, but in fear of repetition. The more you speak of it, the more real it becomes. Like a song stuck in your head. Like a spell. Historians have pointed out that in many oral cultures, repeating a curse even in storytelling was believed to invoke its power. Silence wasn't just about reverence. It was self-defense. Which explains another odd ritual, the story scrub. You see it the next morning. A sailor who told a ghost story the night before is now on his knees scrubbing the deck with seawater and lemon rind. Ooh. To clean the air, someone says. Because the sea remembers. And so does the crew. As night falls again and your ship sails into deeper waters, the conversations soften. No more stories about whistles. No more jokes about cursed winds. Just shared bread, sea chanties kept below the whistle range, and quiet nods of camaraderie. You sleep easy, finally understanding, out here, the strongest traditions aren't written on scrolls. They're whispered between sips of wine and remembered when the wind stops. The following morning arrives with a sharp slap of cool air and a sky painted with streaks of grey promising, in a not-so-reassuring way. The crew stirs like startled bees. Ropes are tightened. The sail is lowered slightly just in case. Someone mumbles something about goat bones cracking the wrong way. You settle beside a young sailor poring over a cracked wax tablet. There's no rower. No fisherman. His fingers are ink-stained, and his tunic smells more of lamp oil than sweat. A philosopher's apprentice, they say. And today, he's trying to explain away the superstition. You're intrigued. He begins with the seriousness of someone about to reveal a deep cosmic secret and instead pulls out a reed stylus. So he says, if we consider wind as a kind of pneuma breath of life, then whistling is, in essence, a mockery of divine respiration. You blink. What? He draws a little swirl on the wax. Plato believed the soul moves like the stars. Circular motion. Breath is the divine force within us. To whistle out of rhythm is to disorder the harmony of the soul. You nod slowly, more out of politeness than agreement. Apparently, this is a known idea: cosmic harmony, the belief that the body, the soul, even the weather, must follow a certain balance. And sound, it turns out, is sacred. You don't just throw it into the wind like trash. Historians still debate whether these philosophical interpretations ever reached the actual sailor class. The more likely answer is no. But ideas trickle. Like wine through cloth, they seep from scholar to merchant to sailor, morphing along the way into something simpler and often stranger. So, maybe, just maybe, some sailor once heard from some merchant that the wind was part of the soul, and whistling with it was like laughing at the god's heartbeat. And then, boom, no more whistling. The apprentice scribbles a diagram showing wind as a spiral, a divine tether between heaven and earth. He claims some philosophers believed that the wind wasn't just air, it was a moral force, an ethic in motion. So, when you whistle, you're not just making noise. You're disrupting the moral weather. You want to laugh. But again, you don't. Because even if it sounds ridiculous, everything else you've seen so far has behaved as if it's true. You move on, only to overhear two merchants arguing on deck, both clearly educated, both clearly very loud. One says whistling was banned because it startled birds, which sailors relied on for navigation. The birds scatter, he insists, and so do your chances of finding land. The other insists whistling mimics snake hisses and that sailors once believed sea serpents were drawn to the sound. You suspect they're both making things up on the spot. But, again, the truth almost doesn't matter. The result is the same. Nobody's whistling. Here's a quirky detail from the apprentice's notes. Apparently, some followers of Pythagoras, that triangle guy, believed that every musical note had a sacred value. To whistle incorrectly was like hitting the wrong chord in a hymn. An insult to the music of the spheres. Which means, theoretically, a perfectly tuned whistle might be allowed. You pitch this idea to the captain later. He stares at you, then walks away. You assume that means no. By afternoon, the sea gets rougher. The sky thickens like soup. A sailor stands by the mast, reciting numbers under his breath, maybe a prayer, maybe math. Another clutches a small metal disc shaped like a spiral. It's his wind harmonizer, he says, made by some old mystic. When the wind hums, it's supposed to hum back. You ask if it works. He shrugs. Better than whistling. The apprentice sidles up beside you again. You know, he says, some think the wind isn't a god, but an audience. A listener. Like the Furies, only dumber. You raise an eyebrow. He smiles. They punish out of habit, not justice. And that idea, weirdly, makes sense. If the sea listens, if the wind has ears, it doesn't care why you whistled. Just that you did. You can't argue with it. You can't apologize. You just pay the consequence. That night, during the quietest part of the watch, you hear someone humming. Not loud. Not sharp. Just low enough to almost be a whistle. The oar nearest you shifts uneasily. A small thud echoes below deck. Someone curses. Shut it. Now. The hum stops. You don't know who it was, but you sense they've been marked. Not cursed, exactly. Just tagged by chance. Like they stepped wrong into a story already written. You lie back on your makeshift bedding, staring at the mast silhouetted against the stars. You realize the philosophers, the superstitious sailors, the gossipy merchants, they all came to the same conclusion, just in different words. The sea isn't yours, and whistling is the first thing that makes it remember. You're in port again. Not a grand city. Just a rocky cove with a handful of thatched roof shacks, 2 fishing boats, and a tavern that appears to be held together entirely by prayer and barnacles. The sea here laps gently against the docks, as if on its best behavior. You stretch your legs, step off the creaking gangplank, and immediately hear it a whistle. Sharp. Cheerful. Innocent. A local boy, barefoot and grinning, sprints past you, whistling as he kicks a leather ball down a narrow alleyway. His mother doesn't flinch. The fisherman beside her doesn't throw salt over his shoulder. The tavern owner doesn't shout a curse. You pause, stunned. No one cares. You approach the dockside fisherman, ask him cautiously whether they believe whistling is unlucky at sea. He shrugs. Only if you do it on the sea. And there it is. The superstition has boundaries. Turns out, for many Greek coastal communities, whistling is perfectly acceptable on land, near the shore, maybe even near the boats. But once you step off dry earth and onto wood that floats, the rules change, and everyone knows them. Historians have speculated that this sharp boundary between shore and ship reflects deeper cultural divisions between the controlled world of humans and the wild, God-haunted world of the sea. On land, you can laugh, whistle, joke, boast, but on the water. You ask permission to exist. You follow your crew into the tavern. The tables are sticky with wine and fish bones. In the corner, a small group of locals plays a game involving stones, shells, and the occasional slap. One of them whistles between turns absent-mindedly. No one reacts. But when a sailor from your ship glances at the doorframe and sees the sea beyond it, he nudges the man. Not near the window, he says. The whistler blinks, then shuffles deeper inside. The idea that whistling changes meaning based on geography is fascinating. It's as though the superstition itself knows where it works. You overhear another crew talking about a man who whistled while boarding. Not while sailing. Not even while the sail was up. Just while stepping onto the ship. They say the voyage never found wind. Days of stillness. A rudder that cracked. Rations spoiled. The whistler claimed innocence the whole way, but no one sat near him after that. Too noisy, someone mutters. Noise, you realize, is code for chaos. And in sailor society, chaos must be contained. So whistling in a taverna. Fire. Whistling on a dock. Risky. Whistling on a ship. You might as well light your bed on fire and hope for a breeze. Here's a quirky tidbit from an older sailor named Petros. He claims there was once a town where whistling was required before every voyager to draw the wind. But the trick, he says, was that it had to be done facing away from the ship, eyes closed, and only by someone who hadn't yet sailed that year. You ask what happened if they did it wrong. He shrugs. Storm. Maybe a crab infestation. Hard to tell. You start noticing subtler signs of this superstition everywhere. At market, one fisherman wears a pendant shaped like a closed mouth. Another has a tattoo across his knuckles that reads silence. In the temple by the shore, a priest of Poseidon performs a blessing. He sprinkles seawater, draws a circle in ash, and ends with 3 breaths. Not words. Just breaths. Controlled. Respectful. Nothing sharp. You wonder if that's the origin of it all. Not fear of sound but preference for breath. Controlled breathing. Offered. Not expelled. Whistling, in contrast, is breath weaponized. Breath with attitude. As the sun dips low, casting long shadows across the water, you walk the docks again. A sailor from another crew paces nearby, humming to himself. Not a tune, just a low, guttural vibration. You ask why. Resetting the wind, he says, after someone shouted earlier. Another tells you his father taught him never to even laugh too loudly near the sea. The gods might think you're mocking them, he explains. And Poseidon, his petty. Historians still argue whether this attitude towards sound, especially happy sounds, reflects an underlying belief in the sea's envy. The idea that the ocean resents joy and punishes it. Like a divine neighbor banging on the wall whenever you throw a party. You're not sure. But when your crew gathers to board again, and someone dares hum a sea shanty a little too melodically, the captain clears his throat. The man stops humming. No one has to say anything. Because everyone understands the line, the threshold between safety and danger. And you've now crossed it. You're back on the ship. The wind is good. The stars will be out soon. The crew is quiet, not tense, just respectful. The ocean stretches ahead of you, dark and bottomless. You feel a breath rise in your chest. A habit. A temptation. But you swallow it. Because on land, sound is play. Out here, it's a summons. The ship glides steadily now, as if the sea itself has relaxed. The wind moves with intention, not too harsh, not too lazy. The sail puffs gently above you, like the chest of a cat dreaming in the sun. And still, no one whistles. But now, you're curious, what did sailors do instead? If whistling was such a forbidden fruit, how did they fill the void? After all, humans are noisy by nature. We fidget. We hum. We signal. We communicate. Turns out, Greek sailors had a whole toolkit of alternatives. You watch them in action throughout the day. A sharp click of the tongue replaces a whistle to call attention. A low hum replaces song. And gesture, so many gestures. A flick of the fingers to signal ready. A slap to the thigh means pull harder. A tap on the side of the nose. That one you don't figure out. The deck becomes a stage of silence with meaning. And it's efficient, too. Not a word wasted. Not a breath blown without purpose. You ask one sailor if this silent system is intentional. He nods. Wave had centuries to get it right. Historians believe these gesture-based systems likely evolved not from mystical fear alone, but from practical necessity. Ships are loud. Wind howls. Waves crash. Communication had to cut through chaos, and whistles weren't just taboo, they were ineffective. So sailors got creative. And then ritual codified the rest. Here's a charming, quirky tidbit. In some regions, sailors carried tiny bells in their belts, not to ring, but to show they could ring them, if necessary. As if the presence of sound was enough without ever invoking it. A kind of sonic safety pin. Another detail you observe: many sailors wear bronze pendants shaped like closed lips. You ask if they're just decorations. No, says a man sharpening a hook. Charms. Keep the air inside. You laugh, but quietly. He doesn't. And then, there are the chants. Not full-on sea shanties, but low, rhythmic utterances, part speech, part breath, part prayer. Rowers do them in sync, softly, like heartbeat murmurs. Some contain no words at all. Just pulses of sound that guide oar with muscle, breath with will. One sailor calls it singing without provocation. The phrasing sticks with you. You try it later, low humming, barely audible. It helps pass the time. Keeps your mind from wandering too far into anxious places. The deckhand beside you doesn't flinch. Just don't let it rise, he says. Meaning. Don't hum into a whistle. Don't tempt melody. Don't let sound float too far. The gods notice when sound gets cocky. Another crew member, an older man with a silver streak in his beard, shows you a little trick. He taps the deck 3 times with his heel in a triangle pattern. That's for luck, he says, but also a warning. To who? He doesn't answer. Later, while helping load amphorae, you almost drop one. You curse, loud and sharp. 3 heads snap toward you. The tension spikes then recedes. Cursing, it seems, is allowed. Barely. But only on impact. You start to see the rules like a delicate lace pattern, complex, inconsistent, but deeply felt. Historians still puzzle over how such customs emerged so consistently across so many coastal cultures. The anti-whistle taboo is just one of dozens many related to sound. No laughter when raising sails. No talking during certain rowing turns. No clapping on deck after sundown. It's not fear, exactly. It's discipline through reverence. When you ask the captain if he's ever had a whistler aboard, he grimaces. "One," he says. "What happened? Didn't last long." He won't say more. Later that night, as the stars settle into their appointed grooves and the ship glides like a quiet thought, you see a crew member near the bow. He's mouthing something, no sound, just lip movement. You ask. "Practice chant," he says, "to greet a breeze if she wakes." You realize it's a kind of code. Speak only to the wind when she speaks first. Another sailor, lounging nearby, chuckles. "You'd be surprised how many ways there are to call attention without opening your mouth," he says. Snaps, claps, coughs, even sneezes. Sneezes. Oh yes. 2 sneezes in a row means someone's dropped something. 3. Don't ask. You don't. A younger sailor gives you a folded scrap of parchment, a cheat sheet of approved noises. It's mostly absurd: foot stomps, hand slaps, whistle mimics made by dragging a finger along wet wood. But at the bottom, there's a final note, written in rough script: silence is the oldest signal. Everything else is just noise. You don't know if that's wisdom or sarcasm, but it feels right. As the wind nudges the sail again, and the ship hums along its wooden bones, you breathe evenly. You resist the urge to fill the night with a tune. Not because you're scared, but because you're part of something now. Something older than logic. A floating orchestra that plays without playing. And it works. The sea remains calm. The stars don't blink. And the gods, if they're listening, remain mercifully quiet. You wake before dawn, stirred by the low groan of timber and the gentle slap of water along the hull. It's still dark enough that the stars haven't blinked out yet, and everything feels suspended in soft indigo. This morning, the ship seems lighter. Not in weight, but in mood. The crew moves with ease. The wind is cooperative. The ropes don't creak so much as hum. You've been aboard long enough now to notice this kind of shift. A ship, like a living creature, has its own emotional atmosphere. Today, it's breathing calmly. And yet, no one's whistling. But they are communicating. You notice it as you sip watered wine by the mast. Any signals, gestures, rhythmic movements that pass like invisible language from bow to stern. The whisper has become a kind of ritual code. The silence isn't absence. It's strategy. A crewman named the Xandros shows you a clever signal, a double tap on the shoulder followed by a slow turn of the wrist. It means change course slightly. You ask why they don't just say it. He shrugs. The sea hears more than we intend. It's not paranoia. It's tradition. And what's more fascinating, some sailors replace the whistle with symbolic action, like blowing over an open palm, or dragging a rope slowly across the deck. One man even taps a carved shell against the mast 3 times when the wind changes, as if thanking it without saying so aloud. You start to see that silence doesn't equal powerlessness. Quite the opposite. The act of not whistling has generated its own language. A hidden lexicon. A dance of half-sounds and conscious stillness. It's beautiful in its restraint. You ask the captain about it later. Why not simply outlaw sound? He snorts. Because a mute crew is a dead one. It's not silence we need. It's awareness. Historians suggest that many of these quiet traditions weren't based solely on superstition. They were refined responses to real danger. Before you had horns or radios or flags, you had a glance, a breath, a cough. And on the sea, timing is everything. Whistling sharp, unpredictable, attention-hogging had no place in such precision. You remember something the philosopher's apprentice said back on that windless day, a whisper is a sound that listens to itself. Out here, that's not just poetic. It's practical. You watch a deckhand demonstrate a wind check motion, licking his thumb, raising it slowly, and pressing it to his forehead. Doesn't do much, meteorologically. But it shows intent. A non-verbal message, in watching the air. Someone else flicks their fingers 3 times in a sideways spiral before reefing the sail. A quiet blessing. Or maybe a mnemonic. It becomes clear that every action carries weight. Because without words, without the ability to blurt things out, each movement has to mean something. And that includes the replacements for the whistle. You jot down a few of your favorites, a wooden reed tied to the belt that squeaks when bent, used only during emergencies. A circle drawn in the dust on deck to signal pause and watch. A snapped twig placed near the rudder post, a silent reminder that something broke, something needs mending. You're amazed. Out of prohibition, they've built innovation. All because of one forbidden sound. Here's a quirky fact shared by a trader on board. In one island port, sailors rub crushed mint leaves on the sail ropes for good luck. Not for the smell. For the sound mint crackles faintly when bruised. And that crackle is considered a polite greeting to the wind. Somehow, that's less offensive than a whistle. You think about all the times back on land you whistled without a second thought. A tune in the shower. A way to call a friend. A casual gesture. And out here, that same sound could start a cascade of ritual, caution, and course correction. It's humbling. And then, in the soft lull of the afternoon, a young sailor forgets. It's not deliberate. Is just cleaning a blade, mumbling a tune, and suddenly there it is. A whistle. Clear. Sharp. It cuts the air like a pebble tossed into glass. The deck goes still. Even the sea seems to pause. No immediate punishment follows, no wind. Reversal. No cracked mast, but something shifts. Not in the weather. In the crew. They don't yell. They don't accuse. But the boy is quietly handed a bundle of sage leaves and told to circle the mast 3 times. He does. Someone throws a pinch of sand into the sea. Someone else knocks on wood, twice. And you watching it'll understand exactly what's happening. It's not about belief. It's about balance. The crew is restoring harmony. Resetting the deck. Just in case. Because out here, you can't risk anything. Not even a casual mistake. Especially not that mistake. That night, as the ship rocks gently beneath a moonlit sky, the same boy who whistled passes you on the way to his hammock. You catch his eye. He smiles awkwardly. Silly habit, he says. You nod. But hard to break. Yeah, he says. That's why we have the rituals. To remind us we're not the only ones listening. You lie back on your bedding and let the soft, rhythm-driven silence of the ship carry you towards sleep. The silence shaped not by fear, but by wisdom. It's your final day aboard. The coastline is faint on the horizon, nowhere your destination. You can smell land long before you see it properly. Damp soil, cooking fires, that peculiar green scent of trees you forgot you missed. The crew buzzes softly with anticipation. But even now, so close to safety, the unspoken rules remain in force. Nobody whistles. You sit near the stern, watching the sun draw long golden lines across the deck. It's peaceful, almost dreamlike. The wind behaves. The oars glide smoothly. And you're starting to understand that this quiet you once found eerie is actually comforting. Even the ship creaks differently today. You've seen things, heard stories, and most of all, you felt the rhythm of superstition settle into your bones, like how you now instinctively tap the mast 3 times before a meal, or how you hold your breath each time the sail flutters unexpectedly, or how you flinch slightly, just slightly, when someone laughs too loud near the railing. It's not fear anymore. It's habit born of respect. As you gaze out at the sea one last time, a young sailor beside you starts telling a story. Something about a cursed boat that tried to sail with a drunk helmsman, a broken tiller, and of course seaman who wouldn't stop whistling. You brace yourself for the familiar wave of silence. The scowls, the ritual correction. But none come, because the storyteller never finishes. He pauses mid-sentence, glances toward the sea and quietly mutters, "But that's a tale for land." Everyone nods. Conversation flows elsewhere. You smile. Even unfinished, the lesson lands. Historians still debate the precise origin of this superstition. Some claim it was religious from the start. Others say it evolved from observation and coincidence, growing larger with each retelling, until it transformed from caution into commandment. But you know this now. Whistling at sea isn't just about fear of gods or ghosts. It's about understanding where you stand in the order of things. It's about knowing you don't command the wind, you borrow it. And the moment you pretend otherwise, the sea remembers. Here's one final quirky tidbit for the road. On some ships, sailors carried tiny sealed pouches of Wakfin tokens, they called them. Not to trap wind, but to remind them that sound, like breath, has its place. Open it on land if you like. But never on water. The coast grows larger. Villages begin to take shape, dots of white and red clinging to the earth like moss. The captain gives quiet orders. The sail is lowered. The oars return to motion. You're nearly there. And as you lean into the sound of the rowers' 30 pairs of arms moving like one, water slapping gently, you realize how much you've adapted. Your fingers brush your lips, almost absently. And still, you don't whistle. You don't even want to, because the silence you once feared has become your language now. A language of shared caution, of humble motion, of invisible rules that, strangely, make you feel safe. The harbour comes into view. The wind carries you in, soft as a lullaby. The sea, it seems, has accepted your passage. And you leave nothing behind but the breath you held and a story you'll carry forever. And now, as the ship glides into the harbour and your journey draws to a close, everything begins to slow. The rhythm of oars fades into the hush of the shoreline. The shouts of merchants, the barking of dogs, even the gulls, all of it distant now, softened by the hush of memory. Your body relaxes, the last of the tension unwinding from your shoulders. The sea is behind you, and it feels respectful, as if the wind itself nods in approval. You're warm, anchored, at peace. Let the deck fade. Let the creak of wood dissolve into the soft rustle of fabric as you shift slightly beneath the blankets. Breathe in deeply. There's nothing left to prove. No rituals to repeat. Just the quiet truth of stillness settling in your bones. Out here, away from the chaos of land and the mystery of sea, you're simply safe. Let your breath match the tide's low, gentle, unhurried. And if, for a moment, you feel the ghost of a whistle on your lips, you'll know better now. You'll let it go. And sleep, like a silent wave, will carry you gently into the dark. You are welcome here. The sea is calm, and you are home.